get us kicked off tonight, I'm going to turn the mic over to the Executive Director of Historic Red Hook, who just coincidentally shares a last name with me, Elizabeth Tatum.
Very funny. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I'm the Director of Historic Red Hook, and I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight to support this program. It's always great to have the county historian doing these programs for us. He always brings great stories. I also want to thank Lasting Joy for hosting us. It's a really great venue to be at, especially given all of the local brews and connection to local farming. So before we get into the program, I just wanted to point out that we have some ongoing programming this fall. We currently have the cemetery crawl happening right now. Now this is a month-and-a-half long program, and it is a do it at your leisure program too, so you can do it when you want. There are stories of over 100 Red Hook residents available on our website that you can listen to, whether you're at home or you can go and listen to them in the cemeteries. We cover 6 different cemeteries across the town of Red Hook, which includes the hamlets of Berrytown, Upper Red Hook, also in Tivoli. So it's very extensive. You can do that anytime you'd like. And then there's the ongoing scavenger hunt. So if you're a competitive soul like me, you can pick up a scavenger hunt. I've got a couple here with me. You can also print it off online. And you can do this at your own pace. You can do as much or as little as you like. Some of us are very competitive and are in it for the prizes. So if you pick up a scavenger hunt and complete it by October 20th, you can submit it for some grand prizes. We'll have an award ceremony at the end to end the whole thing on October 27th. So if you want to learn more about that program, you can come and pick up a flyer from me, or throw me an email, or check out our website. So without further ado, I'm going to toss us over to Will to do our program.
All right, round of applause for Elizabeth. Thank you. She does all of the hard work of putting together the website and the promotion. I just show up and yak at you for about half an hour or so. You will see this slide again in a second, because what we're talking about tonight are palatines writ large. These are, of course, we're going to be specifically talking about a community that is in the hamlet of Wurtemberg down in the town of Rhinebeck today. But another show of hands question, how many folks here are Palatine descendants? Okay, small crowd tonight. Normally we have a bunch of them turn out. The good news is I can say anything about Palatines, and the screaming will be relatively contained tonight. But we will try to keep this on the upbeat and on the interesting part. So again, Cemetery Crawl, it is live now, check it out. So what do we mean when we're talking about Palatines, and what are we talking about with Germans in northern Dutchess tonight? Well, for those who are not aware, Dutchess County is not named after the Dutch. I know, shocker. It is named after the wife of James II. Well, he became James II, but when New York was being set up with counties in 1683, he was James, Duke of York. And his wife was Mary of Modena, Duchess of York. They dropped the T in 1683. It was one of those fashionable things to do in the era where spelling didn't count. In fact, if you could spell one word more than 3 or 4 times on the same side of a piece of paper, you were winning. It's a little game they played. So we are named after Mary of Modena, the Duchess of York, which means that contrary to some ideas out there, this county was not predominantly settled by the Dutch. It was a big mix really from the beginning. And up here in northern Dutchess, southern Columbia County, because in the original layout of the counties, Dutchess's northern border was on the Roloff-Jansen's Kill. So we are standing in Dutchess County as it was before 1719. All of this area was more or less settled by Germans. They came from the Rhine River Valley. They were called, in a very general respect, Palatines. We will talk about what that means, because genealogists and historians disagree about all of this stuff. And then we're going to go down the rabbit hole of one specific community, the community of Wurtemberg, which again is down in the modern town of Rhinebeck. From 1737 until 1812, all of this, well, not here, like over in the parking lot in south, was Rhinebeck. Red Hook became a separate thing in 1812. But Palatines were throughout this area. The Wurtembergers are just one set of them. And then we're going to talk about the evidence that we use to put together an image and a story about this hamlet and about what it means. So this is one of those areas where I like to do a little bit of behind the scenes on what history is, the practice of history. Because on the one hand, many local historians, many of my colleagues, think that just because it's old, that means it's automatically cool. And I can sort of agree with that. I can get on board with that. But what I like to approach these programs with is the idea of answering the question of so what? Why are we talking about Palatines? There clearly aren't that many descendants in the room tonight. Why do we need to know about Wurtemberg? And the argument that I'm going to low-key make through all of this is that when you're in a place like Dutchess County, which is somewhat ridiculously old, we turned 341 years on November 1st. Don't look at day over 200, very proud of the county for that. But when you live in a place with that much history, a lot of our daily life, my favorite example is roads, are defined by choices that are made hundreds of years ago. You may have wondered, as I have often wondered, why isn't there a road that goes from point A to point B that's important today? Why do I have to go out of my way to get down to Poughkeepsie unless I want to take Route 9? But why do so many roads go to Bangor in the town of Stanford? Population 7. Because when they were laying these roads out 250 years ago, Bangor was a very important place, but that's a future program. But now we're going to jump in Palatines. Some of these slides are essentially difficult to see, largely because Germany was a very difficult place to see in the 18th century. So this is out of a circa 1910 textbook. The two circles there are the lower Palatinate and the upper Palatinate. Now, to give you a little bit different of a view, this is Germany 1789. Our story starts back in the 1680s. There are some minute differences, but the overall takeaway here is look at all of the pretty colors. Because the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, as it was called then, was not the unified state that we know today. It consisted of over 100 principalities, duchies, bishoprics, free cities, pretty much any type of civic arrangement that you could think of from the Middle Ages was present here. There wasn't a whole lot of unity, which meant it was a very flexible place to be. It also meant that it was a very insecure place to be. So when we zoom in for a moment to this southwestern part of Germany, which is the setting of our story, you'll notice that you've got Wurtemberg here, which is foreshadowing a little bit. You've got the Palatinate somewhere up here, and this big blue line here is the Rhine River. Now on the other side of that big blue line, helpfully in gray, is France. In fact, that piece of territory known as Alsace-Lorraine is France's hat. And like every good neighbor, Germany has enjoyed stealing France's hat from time to time, and France has returned the favor of stealing it back. A lot of this happened in the 1680s through the early decades of the 18th century, so 1710s, 1720s. A whole lot of fun for the armies that partook, really terrible for the people who lived there, because any given day the question was not, oh, what's the weather going to be like? No, are we going to be able to get our crops into the ground or out of the ground? It was more, which rampaging army is going to come through the neighborhood, beat us up, take all of our stuff, burn our houses down, make life incredibly difficult, and then go away just long enough for us to rebuild and then to have this all happen again. Into this situation came two enterprising English adventurers who published a book that has become known as the Golden Book. This book, written in German, illustrated with woodcuts, talked about the glories to be found in the New World, specifically in England's North American colonies, because this predates Great Britain as a polity. Britain and Scotland are separate. So it's, that's a land of milk and honey. You just go there. There's food everywhere. You don't have to worry about anything. And the British Empire really wants people, so they will give you a free ride. So beginning in the late 1680s, a whole bunch of people leave this entire area of the southern Rhineland and go to London. They go up to Rotterdam. They get passage over to London. They arrive and they say, look, we're here. Where's our ticket to America? You told us to come. We've arrived. The British-English government at that point says, what? We didn't tell you to come. What exactly do you think is going on? And this isn't like 4 or 5 people or 400 or 500 people. It's above 20,000 people that begin showing up around London, and they are put into camps. They get to spend the winters around London in tents. This is during a period in time that we call the Little Ice Age, so not really hospitable. They're not growing wine in England at this point in time. But they're kind of stuck there because they don't want to go back. They've been made this promise. Eventually, the government of Queen Anne in 1708 decides, you know what, we should probably just give these people what they want, ship them to America, find something to do with them. And the bright idea that comes out of this is to send them to the Hudson Valley. So to give you an idea of where they're coming from, and this is again part of that foreshadowing of what are Palatines, you've got just this all confused situation here. This is how it looks in modern Germany. These are all their version of states, basically. And we're talking about people who are coming from Baden-Württemberg and Rhineland-Pfalz. It's much more organized now. They've had a couple of centuries to get their act together. So when they arrive in London, the English officials say, who are you guys? And remember, this is a point in time in which there's a lot of tension between Catholics and Protestants. They are in the midst of continuing to fight wars of religion. The Germans arriving in London know that there is a correct answer to this question as far as the British crown is concerned. And the correct answer is Protestants. Now in all of this area, and remember, back in the 1700s, it's speckled with all sorts of different little kingdoms and whatnot, some of which are Protestant, some of which are not. But there's one that is definitively Protestant. It is the Palatine up here. In fact, James I's daughter married the elector of the Palatine. So they know that the right answer is not just, we're Protestants. Don't mind these rosaries and other clear signs that we're Roman Catholic. That's just window dressing to get us through Rotterdam. We're Protestants, and we are from the Palatinate because the English royal family has a connection there. So win, 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 win. As a result, English bureaucrats, in the fine tradition that we still follow today, decide to name all of these Germans Palatines, despite the fact that many of them are actually coming from Wurtemberg. So, the whole idea, and this is a later map because early maps of North America are rough to find, and when you do find them, they're mostly covered with monstrous fish and warnings about don't go here, you'll be eaten. The Livingston family decides that they need basically free labor. So they make a deal with the government of Queen Anne and say, if you ship these folks over here to our manor, we will take care of getting them settled, we'll take care of getting them supplies, we'll make them good subjects of the crown. And at this point in time, the crown is very interested in populating the eastern side of the Hudson Valley because Connecticut and Massachusetts are looking at all of this area and thinking, wouldn't it be great if our western border is set on the Hudson River? And the people in New York are saying, not so much. So the Palatines, in Germans writ large, are arriving into what is now Germantown, thoughtfully named after them after the fact. And their job, what they're told to do, is you're going to make naval stores. You're going to cut down these pine trees, and you are going to get pitch out of them. You're going to magically transform that pitch into tar, and it's all going to be great because Great Britain needs tar and naval stores for its ships. Britannia rules the waves, but the waves come with a cost, a price tag. So the general story is, but they were stupid, the Livingstons, because the wrong species of pine tree was up here for that. It's like, well, it wasn't as rich in the right species of pine tree as, say, North Carolina, where they sent some of the other palatines, because the palatines don't just come here, they're spread out. There were some of the right pine trees here, but it's kind of, you're sending the wrong people, because the folks who are coming over from Germany are not like heavy manufacturers who are used to turning wood into goo. These are mostly small tradespeople, these a handful of farmers, handful of Swidden agriculture, they deal with animals and whatnot. So they kind of look and say, all right, we'll turn this into naval stores, but you have to tell us how. And the Livingstons say, what? I thought you guys knew how to do this. So like, no, just because we're German doesn't mean we are all mechanically inclined. So they begin arriving in 1709. By 1712, this all falls apart because the crown says, we've been subsidizing you because we want pitch, we want tar, we want wood for our ships. You have sent none of that back. So the taxpayers are angry, we're cutting you off. The Livingstons are looking at their enormous fortune versus all of these people, like 10,000 roughly, who are with them thinking, the fortune's not going to last so long, split 10,000 ways. So they just kind of turn off the food supplies to the Palatines. At which point in time, the Palatines split up. Some of them continue up the Hudson and then into the Mohawk country. Some of them head over here to the Catskills and get up towards Schoharie. Some of them head further east. Roughly 12 families come down into Dutchess County because Colonel Henry Beekman, a la the Beekman Arms, has a lot of land and not a lot of people. And if you were going to get into the habit of being a land speculator in the 18th century, how you make money is by getting sharecroppers or tenant farmers, because they are going to pay you, as we will find out soon, in some nice merchantable winter wheat. And that's how you make this work. So this is where we get a little angry, confused about what is a Palatine. The genealogists say, all right, Palatines may not all be from the Palatinate in Germany, but they are all people who were here by 1712, because that's the first group. We trace our ancestry back to them. We get super bonus points at all of our conventions where we talk about how many ancestors we have, where they came from, etc. You think I'm joking? Find someone in the DAR or the SAR, they will tell you. As long as you tell them, my people weren't here during the Revolution, then they'll reveal all. For historians, we look at what the British authorities continue to call these people, and for decades afterwards, they're still using the term Palatine for basically anyone coming out of the Rhine River Valley. So you have people coming from Wurtemberg, you have people coming from Würzburg, sounds similar. Würzburg is on the other side of Frankfurt. All of these folks who are coming in throughout the colonies. This is a pan-British North America thing. From Georgia to Maine, you have Germans coming in. So, of course, generally the Palatines are a story that we see associated with the Germantown area here in Columbia County. We talk about it a little bit down in Dutchess County, but not so much. Now, this changed in terms of talking about German immigration when this map came to light. So I know for many of you that's a big blur from the background. Don't worry. We'll be looking at close-ups that are slightly marginally less blurry. But this is a plat map that was drawn up in 1802 for a guy that we're going to talk about, Morgan Lewis, of all of the land that he inherited because his mother-in-law died. And you know, back in the 18th century, in the early 19th century, if you're from serious money like Morgan Lewis is, you're looking around at who to marry. You're not looking for like the awesomest, coolest, cutest girl. You're like, whose parents have the most land? Morgan Lewis married the granddaughter of Henry Beekman. So lots of land on the table here. And when his mother-in-law died, he wanted to have this stuff surveyed. So he did. Now you may be wondering, as I would be wondering, as I did when I first looked at this, where does this map take us in the modern geography? It takes us basically here. So this is south of the village of Rhinebeck, all the way from the river to Crum Elbow Creek, which is on the far side of Route 9G. So we're talking the southern half of the town of Rhinebeck, basically, and a little piece of the top of the town of Hyde Park. It's a lot of land. What makes this map cool, however, is that, and there's a slice of the specific part we're going to be talking about, which is modern-day Wurtemberg Road, which runs parallel to Route 9G. The surveyors meticulously noted not only the size of the lots, which is pretty typical for the period. They noted the names of the people who owned the lots or were leasing the lots. That's pretty good. But then they annotated in there what were the previous leases on this lot. So how far back does the lease go before 1802? And they also draw in buildings pretty much where signs of those buildings are today. Mostly when you look at an 18th, 19th century map and there's houses all over the place, like, were they really there, or did the artist just have a really good day and wanted to show off how well he could draw little houses? It's a serious struggle for historians. So, we have Wurtemberg here. And where did it come from? Now, this has been a topic of interest for historians in Rhinebeck since the 1870s. There's an excerpt here in 1873 from one of the early chroniclers of Rhinebeck who's talking about, oh yes, you know, the Palatines, their story is well known, but there were these people from Wurtemberg who kind of magically showed up and they formed a church, and that's how the hamlet began. Awesome, which back in the 1870s was an acceptable form of history. They've raised the bar slightly for me now, which, you know, I struggle with, but we do the best that we can in this modern age. So then we begin to look at what do the primary sources, the stuff that's generated during the period of time in which we're looking, what does this tell us about what happened at the time? This is the data part of it. So our first big data point comes from this guy, the Reverend Muhlenberg. He is the head of the Lutheran Church in North America. His house still exists outside of Philadelphia. It's a historic site. It's a cool place to visit. But as head of the church in North America, he has to go wherever there's trouble in the congregations, which means he goes all over the place. And in 1750, he comes here to the Hudson Valley, specifically to the Rhinebeck Red Hook area, because he's having trouble with Johann Christophels Hartwig, otherwise known as John Christopher Hartwig, who serves 3 different churches up here, and his congregants are not happy. His congregants have been writing to the head of the church in North America saying how unhappy they are with their minister. So he comes up to try to solve this situation, and while he's here, he discusses the things that he's seen, and on September 17th, he notes that we visited the 4th, this is the congregation that's just getting started, the 4th small congregation at the place called Statsburg, about 8 miles from Rhinebeck, held divine services there, and took leave. The next day he gets on a boat, and that bottom paragraph there from September 18th basically says, I tried so hard, could not get Hartwig to be a nicer dude, so this is in God's hands now. I'm out. I'm back to Pennsylvania. This place is too crazy for me. So that's our first big data point in terms of what we knew before I started digging into this. And this is a problem when you ask the county historian to look into things, because I do, and I find some things that are inconvenient truths. Not in this case, though. You'll have to come to a different program for that. All right, so remember, Johann Christophels Hartwig, he's having trouble in 1750. That was one of our ongoing projects with the Dutchess County Clerk's Office. We've been indexing and imaging our 18th and 19th century court records. You can search these online. They're called the ancient documents. When I was first hired, believe it or not, 12 years ago, I've been doing this for 12 years now, I was told you have to figure out some public access solution for the ancient documents. And I'm thinking, wow, why does Dutchess County have documents written in Latin from like the Middle Ages or antiquity? No, it's a funny story that I'll tell you at the end if you want to hear it, about New York's multiple constitutions and how they make fun of the ones that came before them. But in the ancient documents, we have the court material from 1754. This is after the Reverend Muhlenberg's visit, about what Hartwig is up to. And it turns out that he is literally horsewhipping his congregants. And a bunch of them get together and inform the governmental authorities. So he is brought to criminal court. A grand jury, this is part of the testimony before the grand jury, hears these congregants who are saying, yes, I went to church one day and the reverend took out a horsewhip and started hitting me. And I left the church and he followed me out of the church and then kept beating me until I collapsed in the middle of the road outside. That is riveting history. So he ends up plea bargaining this and settling it out of court. But it again tells us a little bit about, all right, we've got this German community up here, and the Reverend Muhlenberg is no joke. Now, the funny part about Hartwick is, has anyone been to Oneonta? There are 2 colleges there. One of them is named Hartwick College. It's named after this guy, because in his will, he left a bunch of money to found a Lutheran cemetery out there, in part because that was one of these areas where other parties of the Palatines settled. So, the many Rheinbecks. In the 18th century, and this is an example of a map where I'm mentioned, you see houses all over the place. Do not trust that. This is the Alexander Thompson map of Rhinebeck, back when Rhinebeck included Red Hook. It's drafted in 1797. There are 4 known contemporary copies of this map, all of which are different. No 2 of them show the same number of houses. They have certain landmarks in common, like all of them show the Elmendorf Inn down in Red Hook. But in terms of how many of these little houses they are, where they are, no 2 alike. And there's a rumor that there's a 5th unique copy, contemporary copy, floating out in the collector market. So if you see that for sale, let me know. But basically, those congregations that Muhlenberg's talking about, we see on this map. So we have Rhinebeck Flats, which is today's modern village of Rhinebeck. Then for those of you who have wondered, why is the aerodrome named the Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome? And even better yet, why is it actually within the town of Red Hook? That's because Old Rhinebeck is where Route 9 and Route 9G cross today, north of the village of Rhinebeck. And the aerodrome is just up here, right over the line into Red Hook. And then we have Wurtemberg out here with its church. All of these have pretty similar arrangements. And this is the Bard College copy of the map. So original Rhinebeck, Old Rhinebeck, which was the focus of the Palatine settlement, where those folks from 1712 came down and first got their leases from Henry Beekman, is today at that intersection of Route 9 and 9G. You can go visit it. We have a little image of it here that was published in the Dutchess County Historical Society yearbook. There's a historic site there called the Palatine Homestead, but the church where Hartwick assaulted his parishioners, and he did it again in the 1760s, is no longer there. In fact, if you go there today, this is the site that will greet you. The cemetery is still there. The church is gone, but it does have a beautiful sign to mark the approximate location. Rugies. We're brand loyal here in Dutchess history. All right, so getting back to Wurtemberg, we've taken a little tour of German Rhinebeck, Northern Dutchess, and we're getting back here to where we started. So again, this is the 1802 map. It's a huge blur to you. It has a bunch of cool information. And this is the guy it was made for, Morgan Lewis. So Morgan Lewis is one of the more, in my opinion, entertaining but not renowned enough figures from Dutchess County history in the 18th century. He marries Gertrude Livingston, who is the daughter of Margaret Beekman Livingston, who is the father of Chancellor Livingston and the wife of Judge Livingston. All of those Livingstons are named Robert R. There were 3 of them all alive simultaneously at one point. Happily, all living in modern Columbia County, so they get to keep up with that. And by the way, does anyone know what the R stands for in Robert R. Livingston? Yes, this kills me. It is Robert Livingston. I'll let the genealogists handle that one. So Morgan Lewis, he marries the granddaughter of Henry Beekman. He goes on to become a bad boy general in the American Revolution. He is the quartermaster general of the Northern Department of the Continental Army. So he is at Saratoga. And while most of our treatments today talk about, Gates and Arnold, they're struggles and their fights were really what was going on in Saratoga. It's actually this guy, Morgan Lewis, who's more a pain in the butt with Gates. Because he's like, oh, you need horses? I wonder who's going to find you horses, or who's not going to find you horses for everything that you need. After the war, he comes back to Dutchess County. He sets up shop. He's looking over all of his new lands, trying to figure out which ones do I own, which ones are leased to me, and which were stupidly sold by my grandfather-in-law to people and deprived me of making money off of them. He goes on to become two-time governor of New York, as well as the head of the New York judiciary. And because he is so focused, and we actually like people in the past who are focused on money because they make very detailed documents. And this map, in addition to having beautiful imagery with it, has this map key which lists the names of everyone in here who owns land, or rather who leases land. How much land they're supposed to have, how much land they actually have once it's surveyed. Anyone here who sold property knows how that goes, or done a title search before. It varies by an acre or so every now and again. And it also shows all of their other lots that you would sometimes miss, which gives us an insight, that we'll get to in a moment, into 18th century lifestyles. So, and this is more of the details on that, which I realize are not that legible from the back. But the big point here is to explain why the Germans came to northern Dutchess. Why didn't all of the German Palatines go out to Schoharie or go out to the Mohawk Valley? And the answer is land. The thing that they did not have in Germany was any title to their land at all. They're not peasants. They're not serfs. They don't belong to the land. They don't come as a package deal. But they are beholden to actual lords who own the land. And, you know, if you think that you have had a bad landlord before, you don't know what a bad landlord is until he's actually an aristocrat. That's a whole nother level of not answering your inquiries. So these guys come into Dutchess County because they are offered leases for 3 lifetimes. And Beekman himself offers some of these leases for perpetuity. Because at this point in time, the only guys who really have freehold are super high in the social strata. Most people, again, are property moguls, and their idea is we're going to make money off of this property by having rent collected all of the time. So it's like the guys who went to Schoharie and Mohawk Valleys, they're thinking, well, there's actually no system of title set up here yet, so we're just going to hope and pray. We're going to set up our farmsteads and whatnot here, and when English civil government catches up, we're just going to hope that we get title to this land. Others, not so willing to roll the dice, come down to Dutchess and get these leases for lifetimes. And part of what Morgan Lewis is struggling with is the transition from leasehold to freehold, because the United States and the new state of New York does not like leasehold. They want to have a culture of small freeholders. So we've got 3 big families. There is a 4th, but not as much on them, that are here in Wurtemberg. These are, and you will see the spelling is all over the place, but these are the standardized genealogical spellings. You have the Marquards, and this is where things begin to dip earlier than 1750, that Muhlenberg data point. All right, David Marquard, he's present by 1758. Johannes Marquard by 1761. That's a starting point. You've got the Poltzes. The first of them appears in 1739. So we've set the clock back significantly at this point. And then you get the Wagers, who are here in the 1740s, potentially leaving Württemberg, Germany in the 1730s, which gives us an idea for why it's called Württemberg. So now we're going to take a little journey up Wurtemberg Road, which you can drive yourself today. It is not like Colonial Williamsburg. Do not go knock on the houses. They're all private residences. But the beauty of this is it's as far as this sort of thing goes, a well-preserved landscape of the past. The houses are more or less where they were. There are more of them now because more have been built subsequently. But you can connect these dots on the map, like a house here, and a house here, and a barn housey thing here, with things that you can see. And I'm going to breeze through this, not talking too much about these leases, but these are the data points that we get off of this map. So, for example, Johannes, who's up here, suddenly he's there in 1768, and George, one of his relations, leases the land that he holds to him in 1791. Now, what does this look like today? Right here is the second Johannes Marquardt, potentially George Marquardt house. Wait a second. Actually, we're not there yet. Sorry, it's been a long day. We're going to breeze through these documents because these are all land documents that we hold at the county clerk's office. But the big takeaway here is that you pay your rent in merchantable wheat. You're not paying in cash, you're paying in kind. So a certain amount of your crop goes to the landlord every year. He sells it down the river. You also owe him labor. You have to show up or send someone in your stead along with either plow horses or oxen. And we'll see that in just a second. So now, we're back to the view today. So starting here with the southern end of Wurtemberg, you've got the first, second, maybe third Marquardt house. And that's what it looks like more or less today, or at least what it looked like back in 2021. And what's cool about this is it had all of its ancillary structures, because you have a kitchen that's separate from the main building, because kitchens tend to catch on fire. You have a threshing floor barn over here. That's where you bring that merchantable wheat, because they're not going to accept the stuff that's just cut from the field and handed to them. You have to knock all of the particles out of it first. And then some of the other buildings. So this farm was more or less intact from about 1750. You go up the road, and that sort of barn-like-y structure is now a 3-story house. I'm not sure if this is a subsequent replacement or not, but it matches the location on this 1802 map. But this building on the left is definitely the bank house of Johannes Marquardt. It probably has a second-story addition that's later, but it is the real deal down in there, nice stonework. So we have other sources, including the rent registers from Morgan Lewis, that tell us how does this situation of living in Wurtemberg work out. You have what you owe, your debit column on the left, and how you pay it on the right. And on the left is pretty much all going to be rent in this case, because it's a landlord's ledger. And so you see rent forever, lease from Colonel Henry Beekman, 1768, from Morgan Lewis, etc., etc., and annual rent of 18 bushels of wheat, 2 fowls, and 1 day's riding, which means you will ride however far you can get in a day to perform that labor. So we have that documented that it actually happened, that this was part of someone's life. It wasn't just a legal fiction. Then we have, how did they pay this stuff? Well, they delivered the 2 fowls, they did the 1 day's riding. Then Morgan Lewis actually made a present of 1 year's rent. That's not the sort of treatment you get back in Germany. Aristocrats, not so forgiving. So your landlords here in America, a little bit better. You see wheat, and even more wheat. So all in kind. So these Peter DeWitt ledgers, which were up at the New York State Archives, and the reason why I do Wurtemberg is because we have so much data on it. These ledgers give us an idea of what people are buying from Peter DeWitt's store, which serves Wurtemberg, and again, how they are paying for it. There's going to be a little bit of overlap in payment here, because the problem with being in the British Empire is no coinage. The British Empire does not want to give Americans gold, silver, and copper, because if you have gold, silver, and copper, you can buy from their competitors, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish. That completely knocks the entire imperial economic equation right out. So no money, everything has to be in kind. Doesn't work all the time, but works a lot of the time. So when we look at the Marquardt family, we have Johannes, and suddenly we have a date of 1757. So all these lease records have talked about him being on the land in 1768. Now, thanks to a store ledger, which many historians, kind of rightfully so, say are incredibly boring documents, we can push him back to being here in 1757. So he is buying a side of upper leather. This is a cut of leather that's usually used for making shoes. He, however, is paying for it in cash, which while you're not supposed to have it, there is still some in circulation. And the other thing about Johannes is he runs a mill of his own. So most of these farmers, when they cut this wheat to pay their rent, they thresh it so they get the actual seeds out of it. But then at their own expense, they have to go to the mill and get it ground into flour. And as a result of that, you have to pay for that service, and some of them are clearly paying in cash, or he's selling some of the surplus. Now moving up the road a little bit, the Wager family, they are over here, and they have a couple of different lots, and one of these is going to be a wood lot. And the idea is everything in your house, especially everything you cook with and you clean with, relies on fire. Where does that firewood come from? During the 18th century, people have wood lots where they coppice. They carefully manage the trees so that the trees themselves will stay alive, but will produce enough limbs, enough outgrowths that you can have a steady source of burning fuel, because otherwise you clear cut everything, then you have to keep going further and further and further for your wood fuel supply, and it just gets complicated, especially in a place like Dutchess County where every piece of land is owned by someone. So you see his house there, which is a little bed and breakfast, and when we look at the Wagers, we see here that they are here on Jacomini's Vlaai. Keep that Dutch in mind. We'll get to it in a second. They're there in 1750. They're buying deer leather, they're buying pepper, they're buying nails, brimstone, rum, 18th century Dutchess County. Entertainment options are limited, and yet more rum. Now in reality, rum is used in food preservation during this period, so it's not all about the party. The deer skin is used to make the 18th century equivalent of jeans. Those are leather breeches. And all the rest of it, the brimstone is used for cleaning, the nails are used for building, the pepper is used to, make food better. But all of this shows that Wurtemberg in the 1750s is tied into that global British economy. They can get stuff from anywhere around the world where the Brits are located. And then they are paying for it with different kinds of products from their farm. The first up here is flaxseed. I'm still wrapping my mind around this, but flaxseed was an internationally traded commodity during the 18th century. Just the seed. They aren't planting it, they aren't making linen out of this stuff. You actually have to grow the flax to do that. But they are collecting the seeds and they are sending it all over the British Empire. Investing in flax futures, big thing in that period. They're also making butter, which they are selling to the store because the store can turn around and sell that to other people who are not making butter on their farms. Also buy a young deer, more butter. So things from the land are being used to pay off their accounts. Now, Jacomini's Vlaai, the Vlaai lot. So if you've ever driven down Route 9G, you've probably seen a little road sign for Vlaai Road. Vlaais are a big thing here in northern Dutchess. It's a Dutch word that means a seasonal swamp, otherwise known as a wetland. Anyone who's tried to develop property, anyone who's been on a planning board knows that wetlands are kind of a big deal. Now, they've been a big deal forever. When northern Dutchess was settled by the Europeans, Vlaais were used as landmarks. So you'll see them all over the place when you start looking at these early maps. Now this one has a cute story. So Jacob Elting and Jan Elting, the Eltings are a big family from Ulster County that come over here. He buys this lot in 1689 and he names it after his wife, Jacomini. I'm terrible at Dutch, so don't quote me on that. Ask a real Dutch speaker to pronounce that for you. And it has retained that name technically ever since. And all of the Wurtembergers use this geographical feature to structure their settlement around. So at the heart of this is a beautiful story about a man naming a seasonal wetland swamp after his wife. I don't know what could say I love you more than that. So husbands in the room, think about that. Valentine's Day is not that far away. But this is, as you have seen, if you've been looking at the fine-grained detail of those ledgers, all of these people who are buying things at this store are noted as living around Yakamenyi's Vlai. So moving on, we have the Berger and Weger houses further to the north, or actually just south. These are still here today. These are both big names. Burger Hill Park, if you ever wondered what it was named for, it's not named after the delicious sandwich. It is named after the German family. And today, you can see probably an 1850s home that is classic Italianate of that period on the David Berger site. It may have an 18th century house inside of it, or it may have the remains of an 18th century house underneath it. Because instead of home reno in the early 19th century, they did knock it down and build it better again. But if you go a little bit further up the road, and there's a little turn to the right before you get to the church, I'll point it out in a map later, the Weger house is still there. It's expanded, but one of the reasons you can tell that it's an 18th century Palatine house is it is built into this bank, this embankment here. The Palatines love to do that. Like today we talk about, oh, you're going to have earth-based heating and cooling technology. Not a new thing. They did it back in the 18th century too. And somewhat more exciting for the real nerds, you will soon reveal yourselves in this crowd, the Dutch-style barn is still there and intact. The Dutch liked wide barns. The English liked tall barns. And that one is still there. You have to look for it, but you can find it. Now, the major thing about Germans and how we can tell German communities are different from English or Dutch communities, English and Dutch build around a crossroads, a square. You see it in the village of Red Hook, you see it in the village of Rheinbeck. Germans build in a straight line with the church in the middle. And the church of St. Paul's, Wurtemberg, has been there since the 1750s, maybe earlier. We know that Henry Beekman flat out sold it to community members in 1774. So it's the major focal point, still in its original position. And if you can see this teeny tiny structure just north of it, that's a school, because Germans are also huge on education. So that's a pretty early element. And all of this, the church itself was sold to the community, but so came a church lot and a wood lot, so that you could cut wood for the church to heat it, and also so that the community could tend the church lot. They're farming it. All the proceeds from the sale of the stuff grown on that church lot go to support the church. So it's a complete package here. Now, moving north, we get the Poltzes, or the Poltzes, or the Poles. It's spelled all kinds of ways. They are just north and somewhat around the church here. Their house is still there. It's not the best photo of it, but this is, again, a classic 18th century German-style house. You see a lot of this stuff in Pennsylvania, which unsurprisingly also has a big 18th century German population. They will tend to build one part of it. Sometimes they'll build multiple stories, but then they will keep building to the side as more generations come on. I tried to get a better picture of that. It was a cloudy day when I took that one. I haven't succeeded in getting the right angle again, but you can see it there today if you want. The Poltzes are here by 1752. They're buying stuff, and again, near Yakamenyi's Vlai. He's getting sugar, he's getting rum, and then he's getting wine. Now, I know that rum is used in food preservation. I think wine is what you use to take the edge off while you are preserving the food with the rum. Could also be used for cooking. Then how is he paying for it? The Poltzes are a big deal, and you know that they're a big deal because to pay off their debts, do they have cash? No, they're not that big a deal, but they have fat cattle. Not skinny cows, fat cows. That is what you want to trade if you are at the top of the farming pyramid, because pork is like chicken today in terms of you can get it anywhere in the 18th century. It's very easy to preserve with salt, but fresh steaks, that's a treat from time immemorial. So he's paying with fat cattle, he's paying with butter, and yes, another steer. So big time for the Poltzes. Now, what is the rest of the story with Württemberg? And for those of you who are really super eagle-eyed, you might notice, or might have noticed, that 1802 map is named Wittenberg, not Württemberg. And if you look in Germany today, Wittenberg is way out in eastern Germany, like behind the Iron Curtain, nowhere close to Württemberg. Well, in our earliest post-revolutionary map of Dutchess County, Wurtemberg isn't even named, but you do see the church down here. In the 1850 Gillette maps, because the Gillette Company of Philadelphia loved Dutchess County so much, they did 2 maps within 10 years of each other, which helps us with Wurtemberg, because in 1850, it's Wittenberg, okay, but in 1858, it is Wittenberg. So we are moving towards the eventual community of Wurtemberg, and then by 1935, it is very definitively Wurtemberg. Now, what's happening with modern Wurtemberg, and why did this initially come to my attention? It was not because the map was super cool. The map came second. I was actually called in by the Town of Rhinebeck Planning Board, which I occasionally am by municipalities, to give an official opinion on historical significance. Because the Johannes Marquardt farm, the southern anchoring point of Wurtemberg, had a rather large and ambitious proposal before the planning board. So they wanted my opinion, and thank goodness a bunch of other historians, so it wasn't just me, on its historical significance. There was a plan to relocate all of these ancillary structures from their original spots as you see them now. That did not end up happening, but after planning permission was denied, I stopped by a year later, only to find that all of those ancillary structures had been knocked down, and then they were rebuilt on site. They'd been sent to Connecticut for rehabilitation. And all of the things in the original planning proposal that were put before the town of Rhinebeck had been included now in these rehabilitated buildings. So the summer kitchen now becomes a guest cottage. The threshing barn now becomes a yoga studio with a bunch of windows added to it. And that is how I originally got pulled in, because as much as the decisions of the last 300 years affect our landscape, we are still making decisions today that impact our landscape, and that is another reason why the history of small places like Wurtemberg matters, because that history can vanish in the blink of an eye. So, I hope you enjoyed our program tonight. There is the bibliography if you're interested in it. And there's my contact information. If you want to tell me, do not comment on planning board applications after the fact. Don't worry, it's all a matter of public record now. Are there any questions? If you want to get to pizza or beer, I'm on board. But if you have questions, I hear a... Oh, okay, we'll start here. Okay?
Can we have the mics?
Mm-hmm. Ooh. This is a deep question about when one road became another road, which we'll talk about afterwards. But that Frost Road, which is the one that goes off to the east just south of the church, that's an 18th century road. It is on this 1802 map. It goes up and connects. In terms of modern naming, we would have to have the records of the town of Rhinebeck's highway department to look at, to find exactly when all of that comes together. Yes, well, in Dutchess County, we never overlook the opportunity for a name change or a naming opportunity. We've got a lot of people to pay homage to. But yes, a reminder that roads are continually changing, sometimes names, sometimes courses, sometimes just when they cross creeks. So John Vincent, I saw you had a question. So the question is the Wurtemberg Church, the original site. So when Muhlenberg is talking about his trip in his letters in 1750, he mentions preaching at a log church, which some historians suspect was actually down on Route 9 instead of Route 9G, that the current location of St. Paul's Lutheran Church is a mid-century thing, not an early century thing. And we do not yet have the hard and fast documentation to say where the original church was, but we do have this mounting level of evidence that suggests that people were along Jacqueminier's Vlaai decades earlier than the standard histories say that they were. So that's the other beautiful thing about primary source research. There's always at least one more document to find. Any other questions?
No.
Yes.
Actually, two. Can you say something about the cemetery that is at the corner of Wurtemberg and Frost? That's one. Secondly, how come Frost Road becomes Zippfelder Road?
That was our first question. Why does Frost Road change names? To find the answer to that question, we would have to go back to basically the highway department records, because they're the ones who process name changes.
Did it used to
But
all
the
be Frost Road all the way to Slide Park?
Yes, that has been a road since the 18th century, but generally they did not name roads in the 18th century. They just said the road to X or Y.
But what about the cemetery?
So the cemetery plot is deeded / sold by Henry Beekman to the trustees of the church about a year after he sells the church to them. In terms of when do the first interments begin, not really possible for me to say with the data on hand, but the Cemetery Association's a big deal. In the 1850s, they file a plot map, not a plat map, a plot map of where the burials are laid out, but this is part of the rural cemetery movement, not part of the 18th century. But that map is on file at the county clerk's office. There is an enduring question from the descendants of the early Wurtembergers: where were these Poltzes, these Marquards, these Wagers buried? And the answer largely is we don't know. They were probably buried in small plots initially. Maybe they were moved to the church. Maybe they were not. Remains a mystery. One more question, if there is one. John Vincent again? I believe all the Wagers descend from one set that came over, but that is more of a genealogy question, and I am a historian. I do not mess around in genealogy sections. Christine, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, Jacqueminier's Vlaai.
Yeah, however you pronounce it.
Forgive that. Was that, it's a little hard to tell from the maps. So there is a place called Vlaai Marsh now that's open and has trails run by Wurtembergers. I was just wondering, is that in that same area, or was that further?
Nope, that is Jacqueminier's Vlaai. So when you're tootling down Route 9G or tootling up Route 9G and you see, like, on the east side of the road all of this marshy ground, and on the left side of the road depending on where you're oriented, the other side of the road, the rising ground and Vlaai Road coming off, you are driving over part of Jacqueminier's Vlaai. And most likely, I don't have hard documentation for this, but that Vlaai may have been what saved Wurtemberg. Because when the state of New York was building modern Route 9, as some of you know, they decided to straighten the road in various places. So for example, Upper Red Hook has been preserved because they said, we don't want to take a turn here, we want to keep going straight. Jacqueminier's Vlaai made it, in my opinion, too difficult to try to put Route 9G right along Wurtemberg Road, so they said, we're going to go on the other side, the west side of the Vlaai, where the ground is less marshy, and that's where we're going to put it through. And we do have filed in the county clerk's office a bunch of very technical drawings of Route 9G, engineering drawings of the substrates they were using and the culverts. I can't read them. They are way beyond my abilities, and they are 20th century. But we do know that they took the Vlaai into consideration when they were building Route 9G, and that is probably the continuing impact of these features over time that sometimes save messages in a bottle for us from the past. So with that, thank you all. You've been a wonderful audience. I don't want to hold you any further. Enjoy the pizza, enjoy the drinks, tip your bartender. And our next event is going to be October 30th at Foster's. That is going to be the quote-unquote sold out, I am told, Halloween Tavern Trail. But there is a waiting list if you want to get on it. So have a wonderful evening and a lovely weekend. Thank you.